how did the Parsees come to India and help India? We know they came to India, but what about help? I'm not sure they ever helped India. So, so here's what we know about the Parsees. The Parsees are Zoroastrians. They are the descendants of a small group of a reasonably small group of refugees who escaped from persecution in Iran, in Persia, and who were granted refuge in Western India, in Gujarat. So around the 8th century or so, 7th or 8th century, up to the 9th and 10th centuries, there was this great persecution of Zoroastrians in Persia. Persia had been invaded and conquered by the Arabs, and the country was very rapidly Islamized. And then there was this pogrom against the Zoroastrians. They were all given the option to convert or die, essentially. So there was a great deal of resistance for some time, but within 20-30 years after the invasion, the majority of the population of Persia was converted to Islam. So some people tried to escape this religious persecution, this brutal religious persecution, and they came to India in the hope of surviving. And the king, the local king in Gujarat at the time, he magnanimously allowed these Parsees, these Persians, to settle down in his kingdom, in his territory, in Western India, in southern Gujarat. The first place where they came to was a small village called Sanjan. They named the place Sanjan after the town they escaped from, which is Zanjan in Iran. So they were allowed magnanimously by the Indian king to settle down in southern Gujarat. They were allowed to settle down and to continue practicing their religion and culture. There would be no interference in their activities. The only condition was that they would assimilate harmoniously with the local people. So they were to adopt the Gujarati language and Gujarati dress if they were to settle down there, and they agreed to this. So it was a very magnanimous gesture towards the Persians who were escaping with their lives. They settled down in Gujarat. They adopted the Gujarati language and Gujarati dress and customs, but they continued to practice their culture, their religion, Zoroastrianism, and they have been doing this for the past 1,000+ years. And there have been several waves of migration of Persians. So they were called Parsees because Parsi comes from Persia, Parsa, Parshva. And the religion also came to be known as Parsi. Even in the 19th century, there were some more waves of migrations of Zoroastrians into India, into Western India. They were called Iranis, as in contradistinction with the earlier Parsees. But they're the same people, same religion, same culture. Now, if you look at the DNA of the Parsees, it is quite strange that their matrilineal DNA, the mitochondrial DNA, is closest to the Gujaratis. So they are closest to the Gujaratis than to either the Maharashtrians or Punjabis or Bengalis or Sindhis or Persians in terms of matrilineal DNA. But in terms of patrilineal DNA, they are closest to the Persians. So this tells us a very interesting thing, that these Parsees, they did not marry among Gujarati men, but they did take Gujarati women into their families as wives. And that's why they are a mix of Persians and Gujaratis. From the matrilineal side, they are almost exclusively nowadays Gujarati. But from the patrilineal side, from the YDNA perspective, they are still to a significant extent closest to the Persians. Now, these people, they came into India sometime around the 8th century, between the 7th and the 10th centuries, more than 1,000 years ago. And they settled down in Gujarat. And for more than 8 centuries, they were a small agricultural community. They were given all the freedom and all the rights that every other Gujarati or Indian had. And they were a small agricultural community. They expanded to small towns like Navsari, Udwada, and they even settled in Sindh. Some of them, there is still a very small population of Parsees in Karachi. I wonder what the condition is, but they are still there, and so on. Because at the time, even Karachi was a Gujarati-speaking, to a large extent, a Gujarati-speaking city. So it was all along the same coast, and that's where they settled down. For about 800 years, they were a small quiet, sedentary, agricultural community. Now, the strange thing is this: when the British occupied India and when they took over Western India, they identified the Parsees as a community to uplift. So the British, they practiced this policy of divide and rule. They're it is this is what they have practiced worldwide. They take a community, they take a society, and they create artificial divisions in the society. They play sides. They take one community, uplift it, and oppress everybody else. So they chose to uplift the Parsees. They singled out the Parsees for special treatment. And what they did was that they bestowed favors upon the Parsees. They allowed the Parsees to become closer to them as their servants and chauffeurs and bankers and all that. They gave them benefits like they allowed them to practice certain trades and occupations, shipbuilding, etc., banking, uh, and all that. So, all of a sudden, within a few decades, this community, which had achieved absolutely nothing for 800 or 1000 years, suddenly became industrialists and suddenly became very wealthy. And today, it is believed by all Indians that the Parsis are a special, magnificent, extraordinary people who have uh, enriched India with their greatness. The fact is that they were given special treatment by the British at the expense of everybody else in India, and it is because of the British largesse that the Parsis have become so rich. And all of the wealth the Parsis have accumulated is actually the wealth that was stolen from Indians and by the British, and it was given over to the Parsis. And let me share something with you. Uh, so the Parsis essentially owe everything that they have to British munificence. So let me give you an example of this. So this is a gentleman called Kawasji Jahangir Ready Money. Look at his surname, Ready Money. So this guy was a Parsi community leader, philanthropist, and industrialist of Bombay, India. Okay, he was born into a wealthy family, Parsi family, who were all benefiting from generations of British largesse and generosity. And he was called Ready Money, which he by the British because he was always generous in giving money, donating money to the British causes. And he actually took that as his surname, Ready Money. So this is a fountain that he built with his money in Regent's Park, London. It cost a huge amount of money, and he owned many large housing estates in London, etc. And he did a lot of philanthropy in Britain, such as building these fountains and various other things. This here is a sculpture of Kawasji Jahangir Ready Money in the College of Edinburgh for his services to British society. And the tragic thing is that at the time when he was investing, when he was donating millions of pounds or millions of rupees of this money to the British, this was the time when India was undergoing year after year of terrible famines. Millions of people were dying every year in India because of artificial famines created by the British. And these millions of rupees that he donated for British causes could have saved millions of Indian lives. And everybody in India knew what was happening at the time. And yet he chose, as a good servant, as a good slave, to please his British masters and throw this money, to bestow his money, which came from British generosity, on the British. So this is the kind of of enrichment the Parsis did in India. And this here is his nephew Jahangir Kawasji Jahangir Ready Money. He was another prominent member of this family. He was the nephew of the previous guy I showed, and he was created a baronet in the United Kingdom. A baronet is a rank in the British aristocracy. So these ranks are given for services to the British Empire, and the service was to basically enrich and empower the British Empire. So the fact is that all of this money that the Parsis enjoy today is entirely a consequence of the British generosity towards them. It is because of the British policy of divide and rule. They uplifted the Parsis at the expense of everybody else, whom they impoverished and starved to death. And all of the money that these guys enjoyed was money that actually belonged to the people of India. And today, the Parsis are the richest community in India. It is all old money. And when we talk about old money, it is money that has been given to them, that is, they have earned because of British generosity at the expense of the people of India. Now, I have nothing against the Parsi people. It is not their fault they are rich today. It is not their fault at all. I hold no grudge against the Parsis. They are very nice people. I even know some Parsis. No issue with them. But understand the history. Understand how these impressions are created, that the Parsis have enriched India with their superior, uh, with their extraordinary qualities. They are today, people think of Parsis as extraordinary industrialists and entrepreneurs and all that. The fact is that Indians have had this entrepreneurial gene for millennia. It is traders from Kalinga who went all across Southeast Asia and who built kingdoms in these regions and enriched Southeast Asia as a consequence. All the Hinduized kingdoms in Vietnam, the Funan kingdom, etc., was all a consequence of the traders from Kalinga, the industrialists and entrepreneurs from Kalinga, who embarked upon these initially very dangerous and perilous voyages into the unknown and went all across Asia. Later, it was the Cholas and various other peoples from India who went all across Southeast Asia. It was Indian monks during Kanishka's time, etc., who crossed the Himalayas and went all the way thousands of kilometers into China and enriched China with Indian culture and also carried out trade in all kinds of commodities. It is Indians who carried out trade with Rome, who sent ships to Rome. It is Indians, Gujaratis, and these Marwari and Gujarati Banyas who have been carrying out trade for thousands of years in the country. It is Gujaratis who settled down in Eastern Africa for centuries and carried out trade there. It is this entrepreneurial DNA is part of India, of every Indian. The Parsis are nothing special. They did not come to India and enrich us with their presence. They were in India for 800 or 1000 years doing absolutely nothing. They were perfectly ordinary until the British chose to elevate them with all this special treatment. So that is the history of the Parsis in India in brief. Nothing against them. They are very nice people. They are very likable people as well. Absolutely nothing against them. But this is the true history.